Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome to another music discussion. This will probably be the last one before the next math rock part if you're waiting on that. But today I actually had a bit of a rant, and not exactly a solution, but I guess kind of a middle ground we can meet. So the topic of discussion I wanted to discuss today, which I'm just going to jump right in, is that I think post black metal as a descriptor for blackgaze is just a terrible descriptor. I think it's easily one of the most pretentious and just not actually describing the actual material within it. Normally, when you think of post genres, probably the main three that would come to mind are post rock, post punk, and post metal, if you even stretch it that far. And of course, there are a ton of other genres here, but the moniker of post is supposed to say or indicate that you can stretch a genre so far that it breaks all preconceived notions of the genre and that you're doing something beyond that and you're making it super interesting. Like not to give the most basic examples, but post rock, I mean, you got Swans, you got Godspeed, Daughters with their last album, Talk, for example, and all those albums absolutely shatter any preconceived notion of what the genre could possibly do. And Talk is very jazzy, and then you could be like, oh well, what about Steely Dan? Steely Dan is very jazzy, and they don't go the prog route. So are they post rock too? Not exactly. You see, like Steely Dan, they still maintain like that classic rock type of tone and type of mood, while I think Talk takes a much more moody and an almost minimalist route with a totally different set of textures and topics. It seems totally different in comparison. And then you got other elements that are similar in the other little albums I've just explained there, like drones or anything else that might be slightly unconventional for a more pop-leaning genre. And you know, a similar thing goes for post-punk. While you think of punk as pretty much caveman riffs, just being as gripping as possible, and if you go the hardcore route, of course, you got the much shorter songs and the really punchy and percussive tracks that are entirely riff-based. So you got punk as a kind of a widespread, interesting genre. But post-punk, I feel like it's a little more leaning towards punk's roots, but instead you've got much more depressing emotions rather than just the angry ones that from its origins. And I've never actually been the biggest fan of post-punk as a moniker, because a lot of post-punk actually sounds just like punk, maybe with like synthesizers involved or something like that. It's not all exactly dreary like a Joy Division would be. But it never was exactly my favorite moniker, but I guess it is fitting for its ideas at the time. But post-metal is a moniker that's kind of wishy-washy for me, in my opinion. While on one hand you got your ISIS and you've got especially like your Neurosis, there are some bands that I guess lean towards the avant-garde metal that I would just throw in the post-metal. I honestly find no issue with that. I think it does break a lot of preconceived notions and set it up for something much greater. So then it comes to the preconceived notion of post black metal for blackgaze. Now, I am aware blackgaze does have different emotion than black metal. I would probably say that it's a coin flip for blackgaze to be black metal, depending on the release. An album like Death Heaven or anything Alcest does, or anything Lantloss does, I don't really consider to be black metal. That's all in the blackgaze section, pretty much solely or independently. But all of these albums here have this very sharp, melancholic, and very active feeling. Not a lot of catharsis, not a lot of dread necessarily. Dread is a lot more of a black metal feeling. But black metal has a few different feelings that it circles around. Melancholy is very rare, but there are some more like grieving or like sharp, depressing albums like Austere, for example, with To Lay Like Old Ashes. I've mentioned these before, these Blackgaze albums. In my opinion, none of those albums really break my preconceived notions of what black metal could do. Because basically it was just like, oh, here's something slightly different with a whole lot of quality, maybe with a melancholic tone. Meanwhile, there are a whole bunch of albums out there that do break a lot of preconceived notions. Now, there's one album I'm going to get out of the way right now. It's the latest Violet Cold release. I don't like this album. A lot of people did like it. I'm glad you enjoy it, but don't listen to what I have to say next because you're not going to like it. I think that album. I think that album is awful. I hate that album, to be honest. Like, I know it's meant to be happy and bright, and I know it's meant to break the preconceived cultural notions of, I think, Azerbaijan, but like, I don't care. I think the tones are terrible. I hear like an anime girl voice in the background. It's like a spit in the face for black metal appreciators. Black metal is a serious genre, and I know it can come off as campy at times, but you have to take it seriously or you won't enjoy any of it. And it's a very artistic genre, despite as caveman like as some of the structures are. But that Violet Cold album, while it did break my preconceived notions, it was just crap. It was just a pie, just filth, just a mess. An absolute mess. Nothing there worked well. And if you want to say, oh, the traditional folk instruments that made it post black metal, Talk already did that several times. He's banjo, and you know what? Panopticon was doing that before also. So you can't even say that. And no, I wouldn't say Appalachian folk black metal is post black metal anyways. I will say folk elements could lead towards something that is post black metal, but at here it's not really breaking that many preconceived notions, because black metal's aesthetic has a ton of folk influence, a ton of medieval influence, a ton of dark influence here. But there are some realms where it can branch out and be breaking these preconceived notions. And there are a lot of albums that you guys have probably listened to that are really just labeled as black metal, that there are little inklings of post black metal in there, in my opinion, for what I would actually consider to be true post black metal in my own sense of it. First of all, is this sort of micro genre of black metal that it's kind of bridging between space black metal or cosmic black metal, and in a way the feelings of like cacophonous death metal idea, where it's just this suffocating like blasturbation like for 10 minutes straight, where it just is the most pummeling sound you've ever heard. A couple examples of that would be the new Najul. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but they're from Australia. Their new release, amazing album, by the way. The Decoherence album from, I think, 2019, Ekpyrosis. Both of those albums are very suffocating in their tone, especially the Decoherence one, which that's one of my favorite albums ever. It's so pummeling and so suffocating that it almost forgoes this catharsis to feelings of horror and terror, like your soul's about to be sucked into something else entirely. I don't know, some giant space vacuum or something. But that breaks all of my preconceived notions. That is no longer a feeling of catharsis. That is a feeling of, or even like melancholy, like Visasataas. I probably just butchered the pronunciation. I know I got it a few times in the past, but the Burzum record, you guys all know the one. Like, well, these albums might have melancholy or sadness. This album is straight up dread. Straight up, you're witnessing oblivion, and you're about to be thrown into it, and you're about to be turned into nothing but dust. That's something that could break your preconceived notions of a genre. Another example would have to be Rare Field Sealing by Yellow Eyes. And I know this is an emotion that has been captured in black metal before. That's why I think this is kind of a good little step off point into the realm. Yellow Eyes is kind of avant-garde and how they use sampling a lot to kind of kick off and end a lot of their tracks, with maybe some like folk elements or a sample of like a choir or something like that. It's very interesting samples. I recommend you guys actually check it out, because it's not going to be what you expect. Sometimes it's like a totally different instrument entirely, but it is interesting, and it sets in a really interesting atmosphere for this really hypnotic series of just a sort of black metal with a really hypnotic tinge to it. And I know black metal is for the good atmospheric stuff, some of that really quality golden early atmospheric black metal. That stuff is insanely hypnotic, like Transylvanian Hunger, the title track, super long, but just hypnotic was the feeling to go for there, which you could say was trying to break a ton of preconceived notions, because of course Bathory was never trying to be hypnotic. I'm sure Burzum, Varg's first two albums weren't trying to be hypnotic. Mayhem probably wasn't trying to do that much either, but I don't know Dead's perspective on his early material, or his only material for that matter. Another band you guys might know that breaks a lot of preconceived notions, Deathspell Omega. And I know they're avant-garde black metal, but they totally break the preconceived notion where of course in the 90s the idea was I guess Satanism for edginess' sake. Decibel Omega really gets philosophical with it, and they have the most bizarre and earth-shaking riffs, just stuff that really just is harrowing stuff. And it totally sounds different, and yet it still sounds like black metal somehow, which comes from a totally other angle, and still is not something you would expect at all. And one example that I'm not a huge fan of myself, but a lot of people love this band, Agalok, especially with the Mantle. You know, a lot of really interesting folky elements, a little bit drony, a little bit of a sonic, like soft, like pillowy sound a little bit, with some interesting philosophical elements. That's totally different from more normal black metal convention. That is an interesting stretch from the genre. One album I love from last year was Oranzi Pazuzu's Mastar and Kinsey. On first listening, it's totally black metal, but you got the synthesizers and all the different samples and just the swooping effects. The thing is totally bizarre and alien, which was totally the point of the album. Super interesting release. Absolutely shattered any preconceived notion. Another album, the Ved Buen's End album. I don't remember what to call it, but it was around the Norwegian scene at the time, and it was the album that was mostly sung with really like still like black metal type of guitars, but it was a very hypnotic release, kind of folky in a way. Super interesting stuff. And probably my favorite release I'm going to talk about today, the Murmur self-titled album. You guys can find it on Spotify. A lot of people criticize this thing for being, I guess, some people don't even describe it as black metal, but it's like soaked in electronics and samplings, and it's just a super interesting thing. Like, a lot of those sounds are completely bizarre, and it's straight up one of the most hypnotic things I've ever heard. And the fact that Murmur never made another album is heartbreaking, and the fact that this came out in 2010 is so sad to me, because there could have been so much more Murmur material released, and it would have been probably some of the best material of all time. But that stuff is absolutely earth-shattering for any preconceived notion of what black metal could sound like, because the vocals are very minimalist, which is already an element of black metal I like, is when the vocals are minimalist, because they're kind of meant to be like a reminder. Having them as like a constant presence, I'm not as big a fan of. I mean, sometimes it does work, of course, but I normally prefer it when they're more minimalist. But yeah, that album is fantastic. Totally just shattering any preconceived notion, totally progressive with the electronics, almost like clashing dungeon synth with the black metal, with like plunder phonics too, like absolutely bizarre and totally forward thinking. And of course, in ways, this isn't that advanced of a subject. If you want to look at Philosophem by Burzum, there are two like half dungeon synth, half black metal songs on there. I guess you could argue that they're really similar, but they form a very similar idea in that regard, which is pretty interesting. And so black metal has always been kind of forward thinking in that regard. Of course, some elitists might be like, "Oh, it's not black metal anymore," which I don't get that. Like, you could be innovative. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm sure no one clowned Dissection when they started writing those killer riffs, and they're like, "Oh, it's not caveman enough." It's like, who cares? Like, it's good. Anywho, the last band I wanted to mention was Gnaw Their Tongues, that one-man project, which is arguably isn't even black metal, because some people call it blackened noise. But I'll just push that forward and say, sure. Like, if you won't accept anything as post-black, if you're for some reason just such a tryhard to argue that Blackgaze is the only thing that could be post-black metal, which is just such a micro intensive thing. Like, it just a little tangent real quick. You can't describe this one sound as post black metal. No one describes shoegaze as post rock. That's just not what happens. Even though rock you don't really associate with a calming feeling, it's not. No one considers it post rock. It's just rock. It's groovy, but it's shoegaze. It's not. It's a subgenre of rock. It's not that crazy. But the final one is Gnaw Their Tongues. Gnaw Their Tongues makes some of the scariest music ever. Straight out of nightmares. Really, really hellish, nightmarish like soundscapes. The song titles are enough to make me want to go home and cry. But that's the final card I could play there. Is like, if you really want something that exceeds any expectations of even what black metal adjacent things could be like, it's Gnaw Their Tongues. But that's about it. Do you guys agree or disagree? Do you think it's a good moniker for Blackgaze? If so, what's your reasoning down below? I'd love to hear you guys talk about this some more. I hope you guys are doing well out there. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Any comments down below would be really appreciated. Go ahead and follow my social medias in the descriptions, my Instagram, my Twitter. Join the Discord. I post there pretty often. I'd love for you guys to join and post some recommendations daily or just whenever you want, because it's a lot of fun down there. But that's about it. So I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.